plenty of stuff to do.
Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call to order the special City Council meeting of December 10th, 2007, called for 12:30 p.m. We are in compliance with the open meeting law?
Correct, sir.
Thank you very much. Would everyone please rise for the pledge? The flag is on the right-hand side. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item number 4 is discussion and possible action regarding an update on Performance Plus, managing for results. This pertains to all wards. Dr. Selby.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. As you're aware, we schedule quarterly workshops with you to allow us to go into more detail discussing some of the city's initiatives and issues with you than we're allowed to do in city council meetings. So this is intended to be kind of a workshop setting, although we do have a lot of information to provide to you. Our first topic is an update on Performance Plus, which is our initiative to have efficient city government, to create a system where we're more accountable for our expenditures and we can identify to you and to the public just how well we're doing financially in terms of getting the best bang for the taxpayer dollar. Performance Plus is kind of an outgrowth of something that I promised the council when you appointed me about 5 years ago that we were going to go into a performance management mode of operation, and we're finally getting there thanks to efforts of a lot of city staff and in particular Deputy Manager Fretwell, who kind of took the lead on this. And you'll hear later in the second presentation today about how we're integrating this into our budgeting process this coming year. So with that, I'd like to introduce Deputy Manager Fretwell and Penny Towers, who will both address you today.
All right, very good. Thank you, Dr. Selby.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of the City Council. Betsy Fretwell, Deputy City Manager. Penny Towers will be helping me present today because my laryngitis isn't quite gone, as you can tell, so please bear with me if it kind of gives out. I'll probably go a little slower than normal. What I'd like to do is just start with a quick overview of what we'd like to cover today. One, just a refresher of what I presented to you last spring in our one of our budget workshops regarding Performance Plus and what it is, as well as why, which Dr. Selby alluded to in his opening comments, our implementation timeline, and what our expected results are. We've been going through this process now for several months, and I think we've integrated some quotes from people who've been integrally involved in the rollout and implementation of Performance Plus, which is a performance management system for the city of Las Vegas. And this is a quote from Billy Bastian, who's here, that basically says, this is a forum for them to evaluate their operations and develop a course of action that can better serve both the staff and the citizens. When we're implementing this effort, and it really is an effort, it's a new way of doing business that integrates quite a bit of data into our decision-making efforts. It should help you as you set priorities, and it should create greater transparency with our citizens, which I think is critically important given the day and age that we're in with information being so abundant. So we're trying to get more meaningful performance information that will help you and the senior management team and your leadership team throughout the organization make more meaningful budget decisions. We're also focusing in on resource allocations that are aligned to your priorities, and we're going to spend a decent amount of time on that in my presentation to talk about how we're trying to do that. We want to make sure that you know that we haven't lost sight of what you've told us is the most important thing that you feel we need to be accomplishing as a city. We also are gathering operational performance information and trying to create and weave in accountability associated with that. So we have an example of one of the program forms, one of the program budget forms that I think will begin to show you the kind of data that we're gathering now. And I think one of the most powerful things we've seen is the interdepartmental collaboration that's come as a result of having these strategic business plans developed and our goal to eliminate our silos. Just a quick snapshot of where we've been. You adopted in 2005 8 finalized and updated council priorities, and we've been pushing to achieve those every way we can. As a result, in 2006, we wanted to be proven guilty of accomplishing your priorities, so we created some key performance indicators. The department heads and key managers throughout the organization helped identify strategic goals, and we also implemented a series of pilot performance budgets in the public safety and criminal justice departments. As I indicated last spring, we felt like we needed to have a much more integrated approach between strategic planning, business planning, budgeting, and performance management. And so we set about doing that through Performance Plus. And we initiated that at the beginning of this year. This is how we did it before. You set a priority. We put goals down that we thought helped achieve those priorities. We created those key performance indicators, and then we got outcomes. The new way we're doing it is slightly different, but I think meaningfully different. And this is how we're doing it now. We have council priorities, which you've identified those 8 priorities. We have strategic business plans in every department that seek to achieve those priorities. But they also integrate key operational facets of what those organizations do in the mission that you've laid out for them in your ordinances that create them and ordinances that drive how we do business. And as a result, we've identified key performance measures in those strategic business plans that we'll show you a couple of examples of later, and those yield strategic results. I'm going to turn it over to Penny and let her go through the implementation timeline and some of the integration efforts that we're undergoing now.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'll try that again. Gee, for tall people. Quickly, Phase 1 included 6 departments that went through the training. They were Municipal Court, Detention and Enforcement, Information Technologies, Fire and Rescue, Finance and Business, and Human Resources. And after they experienced the wonderful educational processes through those several months with Widener-facilitated consultants, well, the consultants were facilitating, then we introduced 8 more departments, and they were Administrative Services, Government Affairs, Communications, Planning, Public Works, Clerk's Office, Field Operation, and Leisure Services. Now, the last 8 that I mentioned are just now finishing the strategic business plans. And what does all that mean? That means we are rewriting our goals and strategies and measures to address your council priorities. Phase 3 will begin in May or June, and we will have the departments going through as Neighborhood Services, Building and Safety, and OBD, Office of Business and Development. This is my first time, be gentle. And internal audit. And then all the departments will have completed their budgets and the restructuring of their budgets to address the council priorities, again, keeping that foremost in our minds, by June 2010, and possibly even later than that, because this is a huge undertaking, so it is going to take a little bit more time than we initially expected. Currently, over 300 employees have gone through the process. There are more than that, but we know for sure 300 have been counted. 14 departments have completed their strategic business plans. This is an example from one of those strategic business plans. This happens to be Fire and Rescue, and the reason why we're showing you this slide is so that you understand that the rewriting of the budget is aligned again to the council priorities, and all of the measures are a testimony to the efforts to achieve those 8 priorities. Every department which will go and has gone through the planning process will identify what's called the family of measures. All the departments will identify what their major results are. What are we wanting to achieve? The results that will directly answer the council priorities. The second set of measures is outputs. How do we achieve the results? What do we count to get there? Again, to show complete transparency and accountability. Demands. What's expected of us? Most importantly, what's expected of us from you and the citizens? And last but not least, what is it costing us to achieve the results that marry to your council priorities? Another quote from Deputy Fire Chief Rick Gracia. He's extremely sold on this process because he loves to count, he loves to measure, so during his 8th term as an executive here with the city, he has found this process to be the most accountable. Today's situation. Again, we're aligning key performance measures that I just mentioned, result, output, demand, efficiency, to the strategic results and council priorities. What's currently in progress is managing cost and revenue resources, providing a safe environment, and providing an open government, always keeping in mind that we want to be more transparent and more accountable. Those council priorities pending are creating and integrating, managing orderly and sustainable development, support and encourage sustainability, aggressively attracting new business to our community, promoting healthy lifestyles, which I recently just had a brownie, that probably doesn't address that, and then revitalizing and invigorating out the more mature areas. We're going to focus on 2 priorities, providing a safe environment and managing cost and revenue resources, and again, open government. Now, council priority number 2, managing cost and revenue resources. This is an evolution. What we have in the first column is the previous strategic goal, which is conducting training and consulting the internal departments to help strengthen spend management. And again, that's addressing priority 2. But look at the evolution. We want to be more accountable. We want to be more transparent. How do we do that? We identify a strategic result. 5 years out, 2012. What are we targeting? What are we going after? We want to be able to have our community benefit from a more fiscally responsible government. Key performance measures, these have been identified as a % increase in the bond rating. 75% of businesses' services payments will be paid online. Again, giving the community residents an opportunity to take care of the business from home. 15% savings for negotiated purchases. Again, addressing priority 2, managing cost. IT's evolution of their measures to address managing cost. Another example, leveraging new technologies was their previous goal. You can see where it's more specific currently. By 2012, information technologies will provide business solutions that are more fiscally responsible and will address the customer needs more directly. Their performance measure to help evolve to the addressing the managing costs is 80% or higher of customers will rate responses to service requests as good or excellent, which means we will conduct a lot more customer surveys to hear from our citizenry to find out, are we addressing their needs, which we can always work together to improve because our citizenry and needs are constantly changing, and we need to make sure that we keep in step with those. Another measure, 80% or higher of the business solutions implemented will satisfy the needs, the business needs. And again, that will be reported through surveys. And then the last strategic result, by 2012, information technologies will provide effective business system deliveries as evidenced by. And again, IT cost per citizen will be at or below the benchmark average, and currently we have noted here is $38 per citizen per year for every year. Addressing council priority number 7, provide a safe environment for residents. An example from the strategic business plan of D&E, Detention Enforcement, their previous goal, you can see where it's more general, develop programs aimed at preventing crimes and empowering neighborhoods, and we've fine-tuned it to say one of their strategic results, by 2012, the public will experience a safer community, and here's how it's going to be evidenced. 95% of priority calls will be responded to within 10 minutes of dispatch, and 5% of suspects contacted in the field who are in need of social services will be offered a diversion program. Again, believing that not only confining those who violate the laws, but also providing them education and services so that they can better themselves and fit more comfortably, legally in our society. Again, this is addressing council priority number 7, provide a safe neighborhood. Another example, fire and rescue. Again, the general strategic goal was reduce life and property losses. More specific, by 2012, Las Vegas will be safer from life and property loss, as evidenced by the arson case closure rate, which represents that an action has taken place will be 22% or higher, and the current national average, 14%. The fire and rescue department's already achieving that. How do we know that? Through their measures.
Betsy? Thanks, Ben. As you can tell, this is a laborious process. There have been hours and hours of time spent trying to create strategic business plans that completely align, and 2, create information that will make it easier to manage by and for our citizens to evaluate us with, and to help you all make decisions about what the highest priorities are. I think it's particularly relevant given today's topic of conversation about declining revenues and where we seek to be as a community and the kinds of services that you'd like to make sure we continue to provide. We're working through the first 14 departments. We have actually 4 departments left, and I'm going to try and convince Brad, twist his arm to get the city attorney's office involved in this. We are doing extensive amounts of training, and we are also trying to roll out a communication plan to make this a little more simple, particularly for our employees and for the public. I thought this quote was pretty enlightening. We are a big organization, and it's very easy to get lost in that organization, and it's very easy to stay completely focused on your stuff, your desk, your department, your division, and really pay not much attention to what's going on anywhere else. And Charles Truchell from Public Works said, look, this is a way to get all of this on the table so we can all understand it and really have a greater appreciation for what everyone else is doing in the organization, and do it by saying the same thing using the same templates. I think there are some aha moments that I just want to share a few with you because I think that that's really important. One, in fire and rescue, we've cut 30 seconds off of our response times just by changing the way we do some things in the alarm office. That's substantial when you're talking about average call times of 7, 6, 8 minutes. So we're really proud of this, and I think that because we are staying so focused on performance management, we're really honing in on those things that are critically important to keeping our public safe. Detention and enforcement for quite some time. We've been trying to get some additional data to help you understand your investment. Many of you say, hey, Betsy, we need more marshals. We simply need more marshals. And we also talk about the fact that is there an industry standard for facility security and park security? No. But at least now we're starting to figure out how much are we investing right now in each property we have, so that as we go forward in developing our budgets and evaluating how we're spending the taxpayer dollar, you will be able to see how it's being invested a little more clearly and at a much more discrete level. This is a great example of how municipal court didn't even know how well they were doing. They have a very productive traffic school program. You can see here that their target for cost recovery was 150%. They're actually hitting 366. It's astounding. And they didn't even really realize that until we started rolling our our performance management system into place to make it easier to understand those kinds of outcomes. We talked with Charlie a little bit about this. He has one of the largest departments in the city. In his mind, it amplifies that the performance of the department is interdependent with other departments and with the resources that we have to bring and bear on each other. I know this was kind of technical in the presentation today, but I think it sets you up to know a little bit more about what you can expect in the way of detailed data as we go into next year's resource allocation process. You're not going to see a whole full change in the way the budget is presented, but you will have a lot more data at your disposal as you're evaluating options. And that's been the goal, to try and get verifiable, valid data so that you can know what the impact of your decisions and resource allocations are on what we provide to the citizens every day. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
All right, thank you, Ms. Fretwell. Are there any
time.
questions for either Dr. Selby, Ms. Fretwell, or her assistant? Council Wilson.
Yes. Is Jim Carmody here from Municipal Court?
No,
Okay.
but Keith Gronquist is.
Okay. The question I have is with regard to traffic ticket violations as well as parking tickets. Do we know what percentage of that department's revenue or the revenue generated comes from traffic tickets and parking tickets? And then a follow-up question, do we take credit cards for payments on traffic tickets and parking tickets?
We do take credit cards. On the parking tickets, we have nothing to do with the parking tickets. That we did at one time, but that was several years ago. And I think, Mark, that's under your department. Before Mark jumps in on the question about traffic citation revenue, I don't have that, Councilman. I don't have that available right now, but I'll get that to you.
Councilman, for the record, Mark Vincent, Director of Finance and Business Services. Parking ticket collections is in the Finance Department. Years ago, it was in, for lack of a better place, in Real Estate Office, and when we did some reorganization, it was moved to Finance. We have a hearings officer, as you know, that hears administratively those cases. My memory is we do about $2 million a year in parking ticket citations, and there may be another $1.5 million that we collect in parking fines. Those tickets can be paid online. Recently, we've implemented a little more aggressive program in trying to collect some of those, and we've actually seen a significant increase in those collections. I don't know if that answers your question, but...
It does, thanks.
We actually had that as one of the slides, and I didn't bring it with because it's one of those areas that we are very productive for each of the citations that are issued. It more than pays for itself. So the function itself. So it's a very productive part of the organization. I'd be happy to get that to you this week.
Councilman Barlow?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I can't hear myself today. It's just to piggyback on Councilman Wilson's question, but to elaborate a little bit more. I have an opportunity now to, as far as my bills are concerned, to pay bills online and apply for various things online. How are we as a city moving in that direction as far as whether it be recreational fees, sewage fees? I'm not sure how far, but from a business license fee standpoint, doing a lot of the things that individuals come into the city to do today, how can we move in that direction if we aren't already to provide more of an online experience?
I'll start a little bit, but I'll ask Joe to join me. One of the goals is to be able to do business online, not inline, with the city of Las Vegas. And so many of our bill pay services, if you will, are already on the internet and available to many of our customers. And I think, Joe, are you coming? He may be able to give you some particular examples, but obviously parking tickets can be paid online. Your sewer bills, I believe, can be paid online or in the process process of it.
Sewer bills for the moment cannot be paid online. That's something that we're working towards as a goal we have. We just recently implemented a process where license fees can now be paid online. Unfortunately, a license application, the form can be obtained online, but it can't be submitted online yet. So there are many of these things that are specific goals in our Performance Plus programs.
Actually, Councilman Mark is exactly right. What we continue to do is find those applications that have where a citizen has to come downtown, literally drive here, go to some of our facilities to conduct business with the city. We found by simply putting the leisure services programs online that when those programs are signed up, typically in the spring, 73% of those are actually done online rather than visiting the facility. That's significant in travel, of course, sustainability, and obviously it's a lot less expensive type of transaction than having somebody at the counter do that. We're seeing that kind of result in almost everything that we deliver as an alternative to coming to City Hall and being able to do this 24/7. Last estimate is that just with some of the business transactions that are interactive that Mark articulated, it was something like 4.5 full-time equivalent employees that now can be redistributed because they're not on the phone answering questions or doing that kind of interaction or application.
And the reason why I asked that question also is because by placing those things online, I believe that it's far more reaching than just placing the opportunity for someone to apply online, because now we're talking traffic, we're talking environment, which basically says a lot about our city as far as the direction that we're moving in to really look at the more far-reaching things that we're discussing today, specifically as we talk about transportation and getting more motorists off the street. So this is another way, if you really think about it, to keep individuals from off the street from having to take those additional trips to pollute the environment. And it also, basically says that we are the #1 city that we were reported last week. So I believe that if we continue to, stay ahead of the curve and really stay in line with technology, I believe that we will also be able to help not only the city and its economic growth, but we'll also be able to help the constituents as well.
You're exactly right, Councilman. There's a lot of ancillary benefits by doing it in a different fashion.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Yes, Councilor Brown.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Selby, a couple quick questions. It was mentioned 2010, or Betsy. The spring budget cycle in 2010 is, or are we 2009 targeting the 2010 fiscal year?
It's basically going to take us a couple of years to integrate all the budgets. I don't know if I can get back to that one that Penny showed you, but for the departments that have been through the strategic business planning effort, they're all putting these together, and as you can see down at the bottom, there's a program budget. And what they're saying is that for that $900,000 that we invest today in this function, we're going to achieve that family of measures of results. That's what we intend. So to some degree, we're going to have that level of data, which, as Mark and I discussed, and he may want to chime in here too, the goal is to, as you are making decisions about where you may want to enhance budgets, where you may want to redirect budgets, where you may want to invest differently, you will be able to see fairly quickly what the impact of that shift in direction will mean to that program. So in other words, if you said, hey, Betsy, Doug, management team, $900,000 just seems too much to be doing in fire prevention. Can we get that down to $750 so we can free up $150 for whatever? We would be able to work with that department to tell you exactly what would happen to your rate of code compliance as a result of that. That's the goal of this. So you can say, well, 99 is great, but to get to 100% is going to cost twice that. That may not be worth the investment, or vice versa. So we're going to have some of that data, Councilman, as we go into this next budget cycle. We will have more of it as we go into the subsequent budget cycle. So you won't see a completely reformatted budget this year, but you will have more information and more consistent information between departments, the 14 that have been through this, to help you as you're evaluating your priorities.
Let me ask you this, with this as an example, not so much specifically, but from a general standpoint, our priorities are very general, 30,000 feet and working down the pyramid upside down. But where in this Performance Plus process is the question asked, or is it, that is this 900, and I can't even read that, 900,000 plus or minus, should that even be in here? For example, if Department X has been operating on this amount of dollars in programs and services forever, where does Performance Plus come in to ask the question, is that the benchmark, is that the starting point, or should we even be looking what we're currently doing to get in a better situation as far as meeting the 30,000-foot priorities?
Well, I think there's a couple of different levels of review that we go through that help do that. One, we have a Performance Plus executive team that reviews every one of these plans in great detail, right straight out of the box, where oftentimes coordination issues may be identified, cross-departmental issues where a department may be doing something very similar to another one, to another one, to another one, and it wasn't evident to anyone. So very quickly we're able to assess what I would call the low-hanging fruit, things that maybe could be done differently that create some efficiencies right out of the gate. As a part of that, as we start looking at the outcomes, there's an opportunity there to have the discussion about what I think you're asking me is, why do we do that anyway question, and should we be in that business? And those are the kinds of things that, not to pass the buck, we roll back up to you. All of these programs started somehow for some particular purpose, and those are the things that we try to bring back to you when we're not so sure that we're achieving the result that you wanted, or maybe we're achieving a perfectly fine result, but it may be an area of business that we're not sure that is the area we want to stay in. Those are the kinds of things that we would punt back up to you through these discussions and say, hey, look what we found in this process. This is something that we found that the county does. This is something that we do, but we halfway do it. Do we want to do it all the way or not at all? Because halfway isn't good enough. We're getting to the place where that data is being gathered consistently across all departments. And as I mentioned to you all when I made the initial presentation on this, to me that is vital, because if we take one thing and we eliminate it, for instance, there may be unintended consequences down the line. And so the goal here is for you all to be able to assess the impact and the value of the program on your citizens and on the residents of the city. Mark looked like he wanted to chime in. He may have something additional to add.
Yes, Mayor, if I may. A couple things. One of the issues, and I'm actually stealing a little bit of my thunder from my other slides that I'll present to you. One of the issues that we have is we've been going through a lot of fundamental change. One of the things that Performance Plus is doing is it's forcing us to think in terms of lines of business and programs, the things we do, as opposed to the organizational structures that we create. Historically, we've always budgeted, partly because it's been driven by perceived state requirements. We budgeted organizationally, but we know that we have functions across organizations. It's a silo issue again. We may have functions that public safety, for example, includes not only just D&E, but it probably includes the court system too, and probably includes our partner Metro, and may include other departments like neighborhood services. So when you start looking at a particular program that crosses lines and you start talking about what's it cost to do that function, now we're reaching into other departments and trying to pull budgetary information out. That's one of the reasons why it's going to take us a while to get these things aligned, because we are thinking differently. We're thinking programmatically now as opposed to organizationally. A couple things, observation about the family of measures. It's one thing to say, hey, we achieved the results you asked us, but it's another thing to say, but at what cost? So you may want to be looking at efficiency measures that say, yes, but it's costing us so much per transaction or so much per event. Is the result worth the cost? And those are discussions we perhaps couldn't have before. So the family of measures is also designed, while we want to be results-oriented, but there's other information there that we need to look at. We may achieve a great result at a great cost, but the demand is very low. And maybe it's a program that may have outlived its usefulness.
I think the other thing that's really important to mention is something that I've seen, and others may be able to speak to this too, is that as a result of having this information available to a tremendous amount of people throughout the organization, they're self-identifying things that maybe would have just been, well, we've always done it that way before. They may have been described as, I'm not sure whose idea this was, but we've been doing it a long time, and I'm not going to push back on it. I'm not going to say we shouldn't be doing that any longer. People that come through this process, the departments, the division managers, our technical reviewers are asking some very hard questions about not only why, but what are we getting out of it, at what cost, and is that an appropriate level? So that as things kind of trigger those questions, we're better able to discuss them with you as you set the tone for what you want to provide to the citizens throughout our community. There are a lot of things that I don't plan on going into here today, where there are teams that have been generated that are interdepartmental teams that are looking at things that we've never taken the time to really look at in any in-depth way. Like Mark said, that were little pieces of programs among different departments, but because we only looked at the siloed department, it kind of got lost in the shuffle. So I'm really feeling pretty positive about the long-term impact of the shift in the way of doing business to a performance management system.
And thank you. That's a perfect response. It's not so much, we've had the dialogue before, is a new fire station a priority over a new park? Is slurry sealing every 8 years instead of 7 years? That kind of dialogue, I think, comes out in this process. But making sure that some questions are asked during the process, just as you've mentioned, why are we even in this business? Or why are we doing this function or service or program? And then the final, you also touched on my final question is, Friday I looked at some department business plans that had been done, I think, in 2000, 2001. And even in my office, there was dust on just about all the plans. What mechanism do you have in place with Performance Plus to make sure this doesn't become the traditional book on the shelf that the council doesn't utilize, but more important, you don't utilize? Is there a trigger? Is there a whip used for the department heads? Is there a standard of an expectation?
Absolutely. In fact, just last week we had our first quarterly report for the first 6 departments who've gone through this process. I'm really looking forward to the point where we can show you all some of those reports because they're really amazing. The departments go through and they evaluate how well they are performing in each of these program areas. Some of them kind of came up with a red light, green light, yellow light system where their performance is not where they want it to be. They're telling us how they want to adjust it to get to where they want to be, where we're performing in great form, and things that are working the way we anticipated within the resources that we have. It gives us an opportunity to really evaluate how things are working throughout the city every 3 to 4 months. And that is really a huge change in culture when we've been doing it once a year with you at the dais.
Thank you. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councilor Barlow?
Yes, I just have one more, just to for Betsy, if you can just go into a little bit more detail for me as it relates to the Performance Plus and looking at it from a department level, how is it that we as a council or possibly a city department can look at how we're performing and say, for example, this isn't working due to this new Performance Plus process. This piece isn't working. We no longer need to do this because it's not relevant or for whatever reason. Or looking at it now, it appears that we need to go in a specific direction due to the evaluation of this particular department or specific budget. Can you speak on that?
I think there are a couple of ways that might rise to that level of attention. One, in the quarterly, what we call PPET, Performance Plus Executive Team Evaluations. Those quarterly reviews, that would happen. What I hope will be happening is that will get addressed before it ever gets to us at the executive level, that the supervisors and the employees at the frontline level are looking at their performance on such a regular basis that they're making adjustments all along to try and address those shortfalls, or to be able to say, this just flat out isn't working. It really requires a little more program evaluation than we've done before. It's a little more analytical approach to things, and it really creates an empowering situation for the employee because it allows them to see the impact of their day-to-day work on what we're trying to achieve as a city. So you could find that information coming from us, your executive team, Councilman, through the quarterly reports. We may say, this simply isn't working. Program X isn't achieving the results that we expected. We either need to do things differently, maybe we need to do less of this, maybe we need to do more of this, maybe it's not resourced adequately or in an appropriate amount. Could be over-resourced, could be under-resourced. All of those things may emanate out of that. It also could be the departments, those supervisors, those employees, those department directors saying, I'm not sure who started this program. We've been trying to attain these results. We have or haven't been able to attain them. We're ready to say time out, reevaluate where we are, and get rid of it, retool it, revamp it. Maybe we need to be doing something completely different, expand a different program that gets the result we're trying to get.
So this will truly provide the checks and balances that we will need in order to keep the budget in sync or at least in balance?
Oh, we're hoping. I mean, we obviously, Mark will go into a lot more detail about how closely we monitor the budget. But this should keep things in balance. I mean, we could just look at things as cold, hard dollars and say, this costs a lot of money, so maybe we need to cut some stuff here. Because if we just cut across the board, then we'll be able to balance the budget. With this kind of detailed information, when we sit down with the department heads and their key managers, we can say, we need to do something differently here to try and tighten our belt for a couple of years. Where do you think you can tighten up? And then they will be able to self-identify where they feel that they can do that without compromising the service, which is what I think you all expect of us.
Correct.
Do the most we can with what the taxpayers afford us. So that's the goal, and I think we're getting there. It's just, as usual, I beg for your patience and your indulgence as we get through this transition period, because I think it will be very powerful when we're done, and a legacy for many of you.
Thank you.
Mayor, I might just add to add to that we're really good at adding a lot of activities, a lot of programs, but this is a process that compels us to look back at what we do and make sure that it's achieved what we wanted to do. I think Mark will mention it in his presentation that, we for a lot of good reasons, we add a lot of activities. And what we are challenged with sometimes is looking back at those critically, because we know they were started for a good reason. There's an advocacy group supporting them, there's a constituency supporting them, but sometimes they just don't work out. And rather than keep them part of our budget and a part of our process, this Performance Plus allows us to take a critical analytical look at them through a very disciplined and structured approach and make some decisions and recommendations to you as to whether those activities should be continued.
I think the other thing to add is that as new things are contemplated, because there are always great ideas out there, at least now when we're establishing those, we'll be able to have a format like that that very clearly says, with this level of investment, these are the outcomes we think we're going to get. And we keep finding these things that really help us understand the customer impact. For instance, municipal court has a goal where they're trying to get people who are out on their own recognizance come back in to court when they're scheduled to come in. Through this program, they figured out that quite a few Hispanic individuals were not returning for their assigned court date. And they've determined that it's a language barrier. So now they're working through that to try and get the number of people across the board into court on time, but now they've identified a target audience that needed a different level of communication than we were currently providing. And no one had ever seen that trend before. So with that, unless there are other questions, I know you guys really want to hear from Mark, so
Your Honor,
looks like Councilman Ross might have
just to
something.
follow up with what Dr. Selby had mentioned, Doug, it sounds like we're going to cut government waste by this process, and this tool gives us that opportunity to do that.
It allows us probably to identify inefficiencies. I don't know that we're a wasteful government, but we probably do things that may not contribute value at the end of the process.
Well, and in my opinion, if they're not contributing value, then we're wasting taxpayer dollars, and we need to refocus it in better areas. And I think by taking this approach, it gives you and gives us as the council that opportunity to do so for some accountability reasons. So I just wanted to, that's what it sounded like you were saying, and I had to put it in my terms.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Councilwoman.
I would just like to say, sort of supporting what you said, Councilman Ross, but my understanding is this would help us to be more effective in how we spend money. In other words, maybe we have some places where we're spending it now, and it's good, but we only have so much money, so we have to use it someplace else where the need is greater. So it's to help us more effectively use what we have to meet the many needs of the city. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, any other comments or questions? Thank you. May I have a motion, please?
Yes, Your Honor, I move to approve, accept this great report.
All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Mayor and Council, this next topic is one that's had widespread discussion at a state level and locally as well, and that's the issue of our revenues, our financial environment that we're working in today. And as everybody's aware, we've seen a downturn in some of our critical revenues. But that's created major challenges for the state and major challenges for us, but it's also created some opportunities to take a critical look, as we've discussed in Performance Plus, about how we do business and what we do. Our purpose here today is really, this is not a budget workshop, but this is more in keeping with your desire to have transparent government, to get the word out about what we're doing at the City of Las Vegas with regard to this important topic. So what we got through our Director of Finance, Mark Vincent, is a presentation to talk about our current financial environment, forecast of the future, some of the challenges that we face and how we propose that we might meet those challenges, and to see if you agree with the course of action that we're planning to take in the future. So we'll look forward to Mark's presentation and your input afterwards. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Selby. Before Mr. Vincent begins, I think it's important to set the tone for what we're meeting for today. In my briefing prior to today's proceeding, it was made very clear to me that this is not a time for gloom on the part of the city, but rather to use this afternoon as a way to prepare for thoughtful action in the future. And I believe that's the way we have to address what the presentation is going to achieve at the end of the day. So with that in mind, I'd like to hear from Mr. Vincent.
Thank you, Your Honor. We can dim the lights. A couple things I wanted to accomplish today. The financial outlook specific to our revenues and our reaction to that's probably the most important, but I want to spend a little bit of time today to talk about the integration of Performance Plus, to maybe answer a little bit in more depth some of the questions that were being asked about how does Performance Plus integrate to the budget process. Obviously, I want to talk about the status of our funding for current fiscal year 2008 and the fiscal year 2009. I also want to talk a little bit about revenue limitations. We've had some discussions in the past about it, but I think it's important that we talk about it a little more in depth today. And also, finally, want to conclude with some of our proposed steps that we think we need to take to manage through this process. And again, I want to emphasize...
Yes,
did we have a copy of this slideshow? None of us down here have it. Did any of it come out to anybody that we would have a copy of this? I think it helps us.
I got
David will get you a copy. I thought one was provided in your books. I'm sorry if it wasn't there. While that's being passed out, I just want to echo the mayor's comments again with respect to the revenue shortfalls that we're experiencing. I don't know that they are unprecedented, but they certainly haven't occurred for a very long time. And we are going through a business cycle. Obviously, we're at the down trough of the cycle. I think it's going to rebound. The question is, when will it rebound? And the more important question is how we're going to manage through this. And I believe, I'm a firm believer that sometimes necessity is the mother of invention, and we are a very innovative city, as we know. And so we need to take some action to get through this, but we should look at it as an opportunity and not necessarily as a burden for us. So with that, let me talk a little bit about performance-based, Performance Plus budgeting. As we talked a little bit earlier, we're making a fundamental change in how we're thinking of how we do business. In the past, to contrast a little bit, in the past, the departments would justify their budget requests based upon some demand or some need. They would articulate a need, and they would justify their additional resources that you're requesting based on that. Once they were provided those resources in their budget, frankly, there was a little follow-up that occurred afterwards to see if that need or that goal was met. I think that was something along the lines of what Councilman Brown was asking about. And of course, once programs are created, as Dr. Selby mentioned, sometimes it's difficult to unfund them. Once they get created, they have a constituency, and we're not quite sure how they're performing, what that demand is, but they continue nonetheless. And so that's the condition we find ourselves in currently, I believe. Although we obviously, being aware of this, we try to guard against it. But having a tool that forces us to look at it in a structured manner is another thing, and that's what Performance Plus is trying to do for us, I believe. So what we're looking for with Performance Plus is we're changing our thought process. We're not looking at how we do business in terms of silos or organizational structures, department structures. We're looking at it in terms of processes and programs that cut across lines. And because of that, and because of the process we're going through, it's taking a little bit longer than we thought. It is. In some regard, it's a cultural shift. I remember when we implemented activity-based costing using charge numbers on our time cards about, I think it's 6 or 7 years ago now. And we still have some departments that struggle with it, and some conceptually and some because of system limitations. And so there's still some challenges we have with that. But now what we're going to be talking about is departments will make a request, but they will provide with that request the results that they expect to achieve, and they'll provide the full family measures, not just the demand or the output. You know, we're going to have so many requests and we're going to make so many responses. They're going to have to tell us what kind of result that program is going to generate, and they're also going to have to tell us what they expect that efficiency rate will be. And as Betsy mentioned, Performance Plus executive team will review these results measures quarterly. One of the things that wasn't said earlier that I think is really, really critical for the success of Performance Plus is it's really not an executive program. It's really not just an overview at an executive level or at the council level on performance. It has to go down to the grassroots. I think Penny or Betsy mentioned we had at least 300 people involved. That's 10% of our workforce. We probably had more than that. It's important that we understand that when we're looking at key measures, there's lots of pieces that go into those key measures. And if you're not measuring the pieces, when the key measure doesn't perform, or if it performs well or whatever its level of performance is, unless you are looking and tracking at the components that go into that, you'll never know why. So part of the issue is there's a whole set of structures of measurements that we're looking at every level. And I can give you a couple of examples, some of them a little personal, close to home. We have a key performance measure in accounting that we're looking at, that we're having difficulty measuring, but the measure is what percent of the time do we deliver an invoice for services rendered within 45 days of the time that the service was provided. So we gave a service today and we got the invoice to the recipient within 45 days. We're having a little bit of trouble tracking that, but I keep asking myself, and I've asked my managers, does that really tell me what I want to know? What I want to know is what percentage of my receivables am I collecting on time? Now, if I'm not collecting my receivables on time, maybe part of my problem is I'm not getting invoices to our customers timely. So a lot of this is a little bit of learning we're going through, a little bit introspective look at how we do business, and we're trying to change our focus. It is important to know how quickly we get an invoice out, but that's not my key measure. My key measure is how much of my receivables am I collecting, and so that's taking some time for us to work through that. And even those of us that have gone through it, that have put our business plans together, we're still struggling, and we're still asking those questions. But that dialogue has to go all the way down to the lowest levels. Otherwise, it loses its meaningfulness. So hopefully that helps. And finally, certainly, we do hope that what we gain in understanding about our performance in our programs will help us to make decisions about where we allocate resources. And I know it's not the only decision, it's not the only input, but it certainly would help. And having that kind of information about performance and where we measure up against ourselves and where we measure up against benchmarks outside of ourselves is going to be important. So hopefully that answered some of your questions you had about Performance Plus and budgeting. And unless you have any others, I'm going to move on to our financial outlook right now. I hope that you can see these numbers either on your hard copy or on that screen, and I do apologize for how busy this slide is. It actually was one slide, and I broke it up into two pieces. So I'm going to do my best to kind of walk you through this. This slide, I don't know, you can see the little red dot, so that's working. From 03 to 07, these are actual revenue numbers and expenditure numbers and fund balance numbers for the city of Las Vegas. So these are actual numbers. You can see that from fiscal year 06 to 07, we had a 0.4% reduction in consolidated tax, which you also can see is a little more than 50% of our revenues. So this is a very key number for us. In fiscal year 08, which is the current budget that we are in, this revenue number was $279 million, $279.5 million. We are now forecasting that was going to come in at $258. So we essentially are having negative growth in 07 and 08. But despite that negative growth, because of the high growth we had in 04, 05, and 06, from 03 to 08, it's still a 7.5% growth rate in our major revenue source. And in most cities, that would be greatly appreciated. That's a healthy growth rate for most cities. But the reality is, these 2 years, we're looking at negative growth. Property tax, which is our most stable revenue source, even with the cap imposed in 06, 07, and 08, has been growing at over 10%, and that's been pretty stable for us. Now down here, I've lost my laser. Under labor and benefits and under non-labor for fiscal year '08, those two numbers, the $295 million and the $227 million, those reflect what we are proposing to be a 3% cut. Just to remind you, in fiscal year '07, we actually took a 20% cut in our budget mid-year because of the revenue shortfall in C-Tax. That revenue cut was probably about the same amount. It was probably about 4% cut. So we're now looking at another 3% cut in '08. Now, we propose that revenue cut, you'll see a little bit later, is going to come out of vacancy savings, which is essentially where it came out of '07. But that gives you a picture historically where we are now. If my laser works, and it's working now, you know that we have a budget policy that says our fund balance will average 12%, and you can see that it has been averaging more than that. And where has that excess fund balance been going? It's been going to these categories. T/O stands for transfer out. So we have to transfer money out of the general fund for debt service. We transfer money out of the general fund for capital project funding. And there are some other projects that we have to cover in some areas. Most of that excess fund balance gets transferred out to capital projects. And you can see even in '05, '06, and '07, we were $25 million or more in money that we had transferred out for capital projects. You can see in '08 that we're only looking at $3 million for capital projects. This excess fund balance, we are proposing that we're going to need to retain that, and instead of transferring it out for capital projects in fiscal year '08 and '09, that we're going to need that to help us cover the shortfall in the future. So this is a detailed graph, a detailed chart. If I were to graph consolidated tax by quarter, this is what it would look like, and this is really the crux of our problem. If you go down here in, I can't read that. Let's see if I can read it on my chart. This would have been the first quarter of '01, I believe. '02. I'm sorry, first quarter of '02. This was the impacts of 9/11. You can see we're already on a downward trend. We thought we were entering into somewhat of a mild recessionary period, and at that time we created a committee, an executive committee, to review all vacant positions. No vacant position since February of 2001. No vacant position can be filled without the approval of this executive committee, and that's how we control and regulate the filling of positions, and we can either expand or contract our vacancy savings percentage. Right after 9/11, we had a very steep incline, and you can see from here to here, we had 11 straight quarters of double-digit growth in consolidated tax. It dropped to roughly 8% in the fourth quarter of fiscal year '06, and then it just plummeted. It went to less than 1% in the first quarter of '07, stayed there until we got to the fourth quarter of '07 and the first quarter of '08. We now are experiencing negative growth. So this is the situation that we find ourselves in with consolidated tax, and it's what's driving is the primary reason for our lower than expected revenues.
Mayor Goodman?
Yes.
May I ask a question?
Certainly.
Mark, can we go back to the slide before? This is a pretty elementary question. Do we spend all the money that we take in? And what I mean by that is if we look at the total revenue for fiscal year '03 at $367 million,
Yes.
and we go down the line to fiscal year '07 at 520.2, my quick calculations puts that at an increase of about $153 million over 4 years. as that increase in revenue comes in and we yearly budget, do we spend everything as it comes in? In other words, these are increased revenues, so do we spend it as it comes in? I know the issue of rainy day fund, but aside from that, or do we bank it away?
We budget very conservatively from two perspectives, and we do that on purpose. We typically are conservative on our revenue estimates, typically, although the last 2 years obviously not. But typically, we're conservative on our revenue estimates. In other words, if the state thinks that consolidated tax is going to grow at 6%, we might budget at 5.5 or 5 3/4. When it comes to the expenditure side, it's our budget policy to budget 100% for all approved positions, whether they're filled or not. So we build into our budget a vacancy savings, depending on how large that vacancy is, how well we control, whether we're conservative in allowing positions to be filled or whether we're liberal in allowing, will drive that vacancy factor. Historically, before the committee, we call it the Position Justification Committee, so if I say PJC, that's what I'm referring to. Before that, we probably were in the 3 to 4% vacancy rate, just naturally. That was normal. And so 3% of our labor and benefits budget would be saved, and that provides a cushion in case the revenue didn't come in as expected. If we're too conservative and the expenditures are lower and revenue is higher, that creates, for the lack of a better word, an excess, in a situation where we have revenue in excess of our expenditures. And that's what this, if I could get where it says excess shortfall, that is the line that calculates the difference between the revenue. It's revenue minus expenditures, and if it's negative, there's a shortfall. It's positive, there is excess. That directly contributes to the fund balance, the ending fund balance, which is the next line. And to the extent that the ending fund balance exceeds our budgetary policy, which is 12%, that excess fund balance then can be planned to be used and allocated to one-time projects, most likely capital projects of various types. So the answer to your question is we budget conservatively. We anticipate that in a given year that we will have revenues in excess of expenditures. If we didn't have revenues in excess of expenditures, we wouldn't have money to fund things that do not have dedicated revenue sources, like, to a large extent, fire stations, to parks, to city facilities. The downtown Development Services Center doesn't necessarily have a dedicated revenue source sufficient to pay for the whole facility. So we have to have the ability to generate revenue out of the general fund to pay for one-time expenditures, principally facilities of different sorts that don't have their own revenue stream. So I don't know if that was a good enough answer.
You answered my question. I know I may not be able to articulate it as well as you, but in the past couple of years we changed our system of budgeting for capital projects. And correct me if I'm wrong, we used to do it on a one-year cycle, where now we're going out 5 years. Is that right?
You are correct.
Would it be beneficial, and maybe I'm jumping the gun, and if I am, just tell me to shut up.
Keep going.
But would it be beneficial in this current financial situation to budget out a 6th year or a 7th year? Would that act as a revenue saver? Because instead of allocating $20 million over 5 years, if we allocated it over 6 or 7 years, would it save us money this year?
I think there's benefit in looking at as far as you reasonably can so that it's useful. We have been, last year and this year were the first years that we have actually begun to try to forecast revenue out of the general fund, partly with an idea of what's the future going to look like for the general fund, but primarily because Charlie Kukowski made me do this. I'm giving Charlie credit. The idea here, much like you would see with the RTC or the Regional Transportation Commission or the flood district, where they have more or less dedicated revenue streams, and they could forecast it out, and they could say, well, when these revenues are there, we'll be able to support and fund these projects. We're trying to do the same thing with our capital plan. And so what we're trying to do is forecast out 5 years now, so we can see what the revenue stream is going to look like. And in fact, I have my forecast slide. It's going to show exactly what you're asking. I would like to see us go out longer than 5 years, but until I get a handle and get it right so I understand what's happening on the 5-year cycle, I get a little nervous about going out beyond my capacity. It's kind of like that Peter principle. If I get too aggressive, I won't know what I'm doing. So if you allow me, this is the forecast. So what this does is it takes that very same budget cut, this is the same column, and now I'm looking out 5 years. What I'm looking at here is after a 2% reduction here, I'm looking at a 2% increase here, 5% there, 8, 9, 9. That's, I think, conservative. I like to believe that the recovery in the 09-010 area might be a little steeper, like we saw after the 2001 recession and 9/11 event. But for now, I'm comfortable with that, and that obviously spreads are paying a little bit longer than I originally thought, but if the revenue's there, then we don't have to maintain those vacancy factors like we're talking about. The other thing I'm worried about a little bit is on the second line where it says property tax. We know that we're not seeing a lot of residential construction happening in the city of Las Vegas currently. And we also know that about 80% of our assessed value is single family. I think it's just residential. And so if we're not seeing the growth in residential construction and our assessed value is dependent upon it, I'm anticipating that we're not going to see the same 10% growth in property taxes. So I've shaved off a growth factor there for 09 and 10. Obviously, I hope I'm wrong, and if I'm wrong, then 09 and 10 look to be much better years for us, but right now that's what I'm looking at. As a result of that, right here in this yellow box for labor and benefits, what I've done here is I've taken the revised 09 labor and benefits. I don't recall if I mentioned this to you, but for the sake of understanding, generally speaking, our contractual requirements, about 90% of our employees are represented by a collective bargaining unit. Generally speaking, all things being equal, the contractual requirements alone will cause our salaries and benefits to grow at about 6%. All things equal, just mathematically based upon where people are in their step ranges and so on and so forth. So how I arrived at this number, the 303, I basically took the 295, which remember is already a reduced number because we were talking about a 3% vacancy factor. Taking that number, I'm growing it by 6%, and then I'm taking a 3% reduction. So hopefully that you understand how I got to that number. And then from fiscal year 10 and out, that growth rate goes to normal. Now in this green area, if you go down, there's like a little green highlight. It starts where it says non-capital improvement program expansion, and then it has CPF, which stands for Capital Project Fund, pay-as-you-go, Capital Project Fund, Cumulative New Debt Service, Capital Project Fund, Cumulative New O&M. One of the things that what this area is trying to do is forecast growth in our budget, be it at positions, expanded programs, enhanced programs, new programs, and new capital funding. One of the things that we have been doing for a long time is trying to identify operations, maintenance, and programming costs with capital projects, because we know that it will take anywhere from 2 to 3 fiscal years from start to finish to construct a capital asset. And when it's done and constructed, it will need to be occupied, it will need to be programmed, it will have to be maintained, and there will be utility bills to pay. And we know that we've recently experienced some pain as a result of the budget cuts we had last year and the $20 million worth of cuts we took, that we were unable to fully adequately staff active adult wing at Centennial Hills. We're a victim pretty much of the economy more than our bad planning, but what I'm trying to do here is we need to keep in mind that if we're going to build an asset somewhere down the road, it needs to be staffed and maintained and needs to pay its utilities. So what I'm trying to do with that bottom line that says CPF, cumulative new O&M, is identify operations, maintenance, and utility costs, and programming costs are as a result of a new asset due to come online. And I can tell you that in fiscal year 10 and 11, those numbers in that row relate primarily to the new fire stations that are due to come online. It's the schedule of those and the timing of when those resources need to come on. We already have an academy. We already have an academy that's, I believe, covering. Sheet with my notes. I think Fire Station 48 is already staffed through the current academy, and the relocation of 6 will cause us to have to add some additional staff at the old 6 to continue to support it as air response and battalion chief residents and the like. And then Fire Station 49 is scheduled to come online sometime in the spring of 2010. So that's what those numbers represent. And just in case you're curious, the way this works is when I bring in a new program, the next year it automatically rolls up into the labor and benefits. So I keep track of it cumulative. The important thing about this that I wanted to point out is when we talk about the capital project, pay-as-you-go, and debt service, you can see there's blanks until we get to fiscal year 2011. If my prediction on the revenue structure is accurate, and again, I think it's very conservative, so it very well may be better than I'm planning, we may not be looking at adding any new capital until fiscal year 11. But the good news is, as you go from 11 to 12 to 13, you can see we're getting back at the levels that we were seeing in the early part of this decade. And those numbers, if we were to use those resources, for example, for debt service, that would provide some substantial bond proceeds for many projects. Obviously, we have an issue with jail beds. We're going to have to build new jails, a jail facility at some point very soon. So that's the forecast that I was going through, and you can see as you look at the excess shortfall line for fiscal year 08, 09, and 10, you see negative numbers there. And this is the reason why the fund balance that we have from fiscal year 07 that we're suggesting that we should not actually allocate it for any specific capital projects, but rather we should keep it in fund balance to carry us over into 09 and 10.
Mayor Goodman?
Yes, Councilman Barlow.
Yes. Mr. Vincent, that leads me into my question. As far as can we go back one slide, please? One more. Okay. Capital Project Fund, TO, Capital Project Fund, where we have 16.
Right.
0.5,
right.
0.2, 0.9.
Right.
0.0. Then we have 25.4. And then from fiscal year 07 to 08, where the cut takes place, we have 3.3.
That's correct.
Can you just walk me back through that to
Yes.
get me back to that 3.3? That's 3.3 million, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Normally what would happen, if this was a normal year and we weren't looking at revenue reductions, we'd be looking at roughly $16 million in fund balance that we could appropriate for one-time projects.
Okay.
And what we would do as we were going through the spring's budget workshop and the budget hearing process, we would come back with some recommendations on projects that we would suggest that money could be allocated for. And we would begin to work on a capital project list. And we would allocate those monies for that. And then what we would do is we'd amend our FY08 budget, and we would transfer out that $16 million to the other capital project funds.
Okay.
We're suggesting we not do that this year. We're suggesting you're going to need that $16 million not only to cover the $9 million shortfall you have in 08, but to cover the $5 and the $3 million shortfall we're forecasting you're going to have in 09 and 10.
Okay.
Does that help?
I'm with you.
I'm glad you asked the question because it is an important concept, and there's a lot of numbers on this page, and I wish I could make it simpler.
All right, Mayor Pro Tem would like to ask a question.
Thanks.
Please.
Mark, I'm not a doomsday pilot by any stretch of the imagination. But again, we are in the downswing. I understand how you can go out and forecast when we're having good years. Wouldn't it be easier? How did you come about your projected numbers for even fiscal year 13?
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't it be easier or wouldn't it be better to wait until we start going back on the upswing? Because to me, we're still going down. Wouldn't it be easier to wait until you got out a little bit further and then maybe forecast, get us out of the doomsday mode? How did you come up with these figures, I guess?
Well, let me answer let me give you two answers because there's two pieces to this. One is, well, let me answer your first question. How did I arrive at the numbers? I'm not an economist. No one's publishing any numbers today. All of my colleagues are talking about the same, we're all experiencing the same issues, and I'm going to show you that here in a second. I've got some comparative slides that you can see what's happening. I do think, as I said before, we're in this business cycle. The question is, how long will the cycle last? Will it be, is it going to be indefinite? Do we really see the end? Most of what I'm hearing by local economists and what we've seen is that there's a tremendous amount of construction going on in the Strip. $40 billion that's coming out of the ground, going to create something like 118,000 jobs. We have seen historically that when we expand the number of rooms in the Strip, that our economy seems to follow with that. I mean, we've always typically had, even in the downtown area, our occupancy levels in the downtown area make Orlando and other cities look sick. They're very high occupancy rates, but our bed volume is constant downtown, whereas in the Strip we just tend to get these little spikes. And what we think we see is that we're about to this last half of this decade to see some unprecedented new facilities coming on board that's going to create a lot of jobs. Now, I've said before in the past to some of you at different conversations that I think part of the problems we're suffering with the housing industry, part of it's the subprime loans, part of it's speculative buying and all that. But the reality is the kinds of people that are going to come to Las Vegas to fill those 118,000 new jobs, or whatever the number actually turns out to be, are going to be more at the service level type jobs for the most part. And those are not people that can afford a $350,000 medium price home. So the home building community is going to have to react to that and begin to build a different product that they can sell. We know there are developers that have built model homes that tore them down because they knew that they couldn't sell that specific product. There was an article I saw in the paper now probably about about a month, maybe a month and a half ago, on some of the, I think there were 6 or 7 developers in town that actually are building single-family homes in the 1,000 to 1,400 square foot range that were priced anywhere from $170,000 to $200,000. That's the kind of product that this industry is going to have to adjust to. So you've got the building industry trying to adjust to the product that's going to sell. You've got this pent-up demand once those rooms open up for employment. So, in my opinion, we're going to benefit from the upturn at some point. The question is timing and when. I've tried to be very conservative in this, and again, I'm not an economist. I could be wrong, obviously, and if we are wrong, we'll have to take additional steps. The second part of the question is, whatever it is, whether you believe it's going to recover quicker or slower, we are doing the right thing by at least trying to look into the future. And I have a slide later on that I think addresses your question, Councilman, that, well, what if this isn't enough? What if these actions we're proposing aren't enough and we have to cut deeper? And I think we need to talk about that. But I think it's a little premature to talk about what we may have to do in 2010 and 2011. Right now, What I wanted to make sure is that if we have a reserve in our general fund balance, that we probably ought to retain it until we know for sure that we don't need it for 09 or 010, and that's kind of my perspective. I don't know if that helps answer your question completely, but
That's not too bad.
Councilor Brown?
Thank you. Mark, I'd just like to throw out there that, and I understand as far as the capital program goes, that we have a couple blank years. But I think it's incumbent upon staff and the council to get a balance between zeroing out capital programs versus trying to identify ways to carry some capital funding forward. And the concern would be the longer we hold off with blanks up there, the more difficult it's going to be to catch up with fire stations and parks and some of the things we've been successful the past few years. So it's certainly a balance, but I'd like to, between now and the budget cycle, at least hear some options we can look at keeping some capital programs going forward.
I appreciate that comment. And again, this is just the general fund portion. We still have SNPLM, we still have residential construction tax. There are still other sources of revenue. So I'm glad you brought that to my attention. This does not mean that the capital program dies. And I'm sorry if I gave that impression, but and I'm glad you also brought up the fact that right now we're just talking strategies. When it comes to the budget process, hopefully we'll have maybe 4 or 5 more months of revenue. We'll have a better picture whether or not we've bottomed out or not, and maybe we can make a little better informed decision at that time.
All right, excuse me, Mr. Councilman Ross.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mark, I don't want to put you on the spot, but as the City of Las Vegas's Chief Financial Officer, tell the mayor and the council what you do to come up with these forecasted numbers. Do you actually talk to economists? Do you have staff that does their homework and looks back and says, this is what's going on in the city, in the county, in Southern Nevada? I mean, tell us what you do in your office to help us understand how you get these numbers.
That's a good question. Obviously, I use a lot of the sources you'd think I'd use. We rely a lot on UNLV's process. People like Keith Shear. We also, as a benefit of having fund managers for our investment fund, we get access to the key economists, both for Wells Fargo and as well as Mellon, that help manage our fund. So we get access to those resources as well. We try to do as much research and reading as we can. We're consulting with my other colleagues at the other municipalities and at the county, and also with the state. But really, it's our best guess. And again, I like to think of myself as an optimist personally, but when it comes to fiscal matters, I tend to fall back on my natural side from an accountant, a classic accountant. I want to be conservative because I'd rather bring you good news than bad news. I'm tired of coming in front of you and telling you that we missed our budget forecast and the revenues are less than we thought. I'm as tired of delivering it as you are tired of hearing it. But again, I'm, by nature, generally speaking, I try to be optimistic, and I think this is just a business cycle that we're going through. The question is how long.
Your Honor, if I may, one more.
Yes, sir.
And it's all your fault, Mark, obviously. I'm just kidding. There are those resources out there, though, that are available to forecast these numbers, to kind of see where the economy is going, what you can anticipate in the next 5 to 10 years. The numbers you're hearing about the construction and the employment, and they're all real. They're all out there. And in regards to the market and housing, that's going to be dictated by the market, I believe. We saw that, I think, when the conversion process started with all of these apartments converting to condos, and then all of a sudden the market changed, and they didn't convert to condos. Some did, some didn't. They saw some value there. So I think it's going to be dictated a lot by what's needed and who's paying for it. But I just wanted to know for myself and the benefit of the council what resources you use to come up with these numbers because of those resources that are out there. So thank you.
Thank
And there's also the wild card that we're going to talk about a little bit later, but there, you as an elected board do not have absolute control over the revenues that the city gets, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But there's that wild card aspect of if we could just control that which we have, it'd be a different story. But when you have not only economic influences but legislative influences that affect us, then it gets to be really quite an art. This is just a pictorial forecast of what those numbers you saw on the previous slide would look like, starting. I guess my battery's going out. Starting in fiscal year 08 forward to fiscal year 13, that's a graphic projection of what I'm looking at. Obviously, that's a much more moderate recovery slope than perhaps what we saw after 2002.
And Your Honor, if I can interrupt him?
Yes.
So you're anticipating the climb back up the middle of 08, or actually the climb back up beginning in January.
No, those are fiscal years. So fiscal year 09 is a very modest. That's only a 2% growth. Fiscal year 10 is 5%, and you don't get back to an 8 to 9% growth in C-tax until fiscal year 11. So it's a flat slope. I'm hoping it's more aggressive than that.
Well, we all hope it's more aggressive than that, but I think what I'm getting at is you use those resources out there
Yes.
for forecasting to determine that across the zero line. That's what I'm kind of looking at.
Yeah, and it may be helpful if we look at the next few slides, because these are kind of interesting slides. I sure hope you can see that green dashed bar. Hopefully it's more readable. This is consolidated tax growth rate comparisons. The bottom line, which is a solid blue line, that's the city of Las Vegas. The dotted fuchsia or pink line, that's Clark County, Nevada. That includes their townships as well as just the general county government. The dashed green line is the city of Henderson, and the dashed and dotted red line is the city of North Las Vegas. Now, what's really fascinating about this is it's a great illustration of the impact of a legislative change. In the 2001 session that preceded fiscal year 2002, the legislature passed a bill to make changes in the C-tax distribution formula. It did two primary things. One thing it did is it looked back and it said, if you go back to the start of the consolidated tax, which I believe was 1997, there wasn't a lot of history to it. They said it hasn't really been responsive to growth. The faster growing communities don't seem to be getting their share. In fact, the lines are so tightly bundled in 2001 and 2000 that there really doesn't seem to be much difference between the faster growing cities and the slower growing cities. And so they said it needs to be more responsive. And the other thing that happened is there was an argument that the city of Henderson, because of the way the formula was constructed and because of some issues that happened when the C-tax was created, that they weren't getting their fair share. So the bill that got passed did two things. The first thing it did is it gave the city of Henderson a base adjustment. They essentially went to the other entities, which is primarily Las Vegas and Clark County, took revenue away from us and gave it to Henderson. And that's why you see Henderson up close to 10% in 2002, and the rest of us are down there at 2%. Do you see that? So that's the first thing it did. The second thing it did is there was I don't want to bore you with them, I'm probably boring you to death already, but in the formula, there's a language in it that was called the 1+ language. And essentially, mathematically, what it did is no matter how fast you grew, it tempered everybody's growth rate. And that's what kept all those lines closely bundled. And so what the bill did is it took that 1+ language and it phased it out over 4 years. So when you go to fiscal year 02, instead of 1+ it was 0.75, in 03 it was 0.5, in 04 it was 0.25, in 05 it was 0. Well, if you watch that line, you can see as you go towards 05, the differences fan out. All of a sudden you're seeing a vast difference in growth rate. between the slower growing communities, which of course Las Vegas was slower growing at that time, and the faster growing communities of North Las Vegas and Henderson. So there's a change, and again, I think my personal opinion is that the change in the 1+ language probably made sense. I didn't agree, and I still don't agree with the base adjustment that Henderson got, but that's the reality of what happened. Now, ironically, because the formula is now more sensitive for the faster growing communities, when the revenue goes negative, guess who shares in a bigger share of the negative? The faster growing communities. So now we've got Henderson and North Las Vegas that are taking larger losses than the city of Las Vegas is, and they're obviously not happy about it. And we know in one city in particular has the last 2 sessions proposed legislation to do a base adjustment just like Henderson got 4 or 5 years ago. So our response to that is, but you benefited from the removal of the 1+ language. You're growing much faster than we are. You're getting a larger share of the C-tax than we are. The formula seems to be working like it should be. But that's one example of how, when we talk about the recovery of the local economy, we're not going to benefit as much as Henderson and North Las Vegas, or even the county. They will benefit more than we will, for the simple reason that our population is not growing as fast as theirs, and our assessed value is not growing as fast as a percentage of theirs. Because the formula is all based upon average population growth rates and average assessed value growth rates, not on dollars, but on the rate of growth. That's the way the formula is. So that's an example of why, even though we might think the valley will recover quicker, we may not see it as well as, or as quickly as the other entities. Property tax is another slide I thought was somewhat interesting. Again, the order of the lines is the same. Las Vegas is the lower one, then it's Clark County, Henderson, and North Las Vegas. Starting in fiscal year 06 and continuing in 07 and 08, that was the years that we imposed the property tax cap. AB 489, the property tax bill cap. This was a bill that capped the rate of growth of the actual property tax bill. And interestingly enough, even with the cap, you can see that it doesn't seem like it's harmed anybody significantly. In fact, the county and the city, our growth rates have remained pretty flat and maybe gone up a little bit. But the most important thing, again, is Las Vegas's rate of growth in property tax, while very, very healthy, is not the same rate of growth as you're seeing in North Las Vegas or Henderson or even Clark County. So we are not going to participate at the same levels when C-tax rebounds, because we don't have the same growth rate. So those are all things that we need to keep in mind. By the way, the other issue you have here, which is just math, since this is growth rates, Clark County and Las Vegas, our assessed value base is so large compared to the Henderson and North Las Vegas that ours will tend to be more flat, whereas you look at North Las Vegas, which has a lot of spikes and valleys, even though they're all up around 15 to 20%, but they're seeing this wide spikes and valleys. That's because its assessed value base is so small that a casino project can have a major impact with them, whereas it doesn't so much for Las Vegas. This is a graph we've been doing for a while, and what it tries to look at is the growth rate in our labor and benefits, because we know that if you were to throw the Metro contribution out, about 70-75% of our cost is labor and benefits. So we track our labor growth with our revenue growth. The red line with the triangles is labor costs, including benefits, and the blue line with the squares is revenue growth. Now, labor does include new positions, so it's not just growth in existing positions. It does look at when we add positions. And they kind of track. Sometimes they get inverted a little bit, but it's not too much of a problem until you get to fiscal year 07, last fiscal year, when all of a sudden, last fiscal year I think we added 95 positions. 80% of those, 80% of those were in, I think 60% of those were in public safety, And there was another 20% of those positions, or 15% of those positions that went to field ops in the maintenance area, parks and recreation maintenance. So we added 95 positions, but our revenue went down. And as you can see and this is total revenue, so you can see in 07 and 08, we've got this little inversion where our labor force is growing faster than our revenues. And based upon the forecast that Councilman Ross was grilling me over, that forecast would produce this result. So we get those two lines more in agreement. So obviously we can't live for very long when our labor costs are growing faster than our revenues. We have to bring those in alignment at some point. I want to talk a little bit about control over the revenues and what our limitations are. When we talk about taxes like consolidated tax, property tax, franchise taxes, and license and permit fees, those are all limited or controlled to a large extent, if not directly controlled by the state and state law. And there are just a few revenues, fines and forfeits, and charges for services that we control. We can set our own rates for our charges for services, for example. So what this graph tells me is that when we're experiencing a downturn in revenues, we really don't have, you as an elected board don't have a whole lot of control in raising property taxes. That's really the message here. Property taxes, or any taxes for that matter. You can't increase sales tax. You can increase the property tax rate, but because of AB 49, any excess tax bill over 3% gets abated. So you can raise the rate, but you won't generate any revenue from it until some time well down in the future. Franchise fees are capped at 5% by the state. We're already at that level. There's not much more we can do there other than go with the rate structures of the utility agencies. And licenses in particular are also capped at a 3% growth rate that we have to watch for. So there's very little that you can control. And I just point that out because sometimes a reaction, and again, I'm not suggesting that when times are tough we should raise taxes and fees. That's not at all what I'm suggesting. I'm just stating that whatever happens, we're pretty much at the mercy of either the economy or the state of Nevada, either one, sometimes both.
And as a result of that statement, I see we have some of our lobbyists here today. Mm-hmm. Would our lobbyists stand up, please?
Bob?
Okay. All right. Did you hear what Mr. Vincent said? We're in large part at the mercy of the state as a result of being a Dillon's Rule creation. And I think that because of the presentation that I've heard today, that the city is carefully looking at our destiny and our future and how we're going to pay for it, that we should have the prerogative of being able to fulfill that destiny. And at this time, I'm going to direct the lobbyists to seriously explore once and for all whether we can become a home-ruled city and be able to effectuate the plans and desires of the city without, as Mr. Vincent says, being a creature of the state. So I hope you take that to heed.
Make that a motion.
Make a motion. I so move. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So now you don't take it to heed, do it.
Mayor Goodman?
Yes.
I'm not sure if this is speaking out of turn, but I'm just thinking as we look at the economic forecast of our future, as Mr. Vincent has brought to us, has there been any conversation as to whether or not consolidation of municipalities would work as to benefit the community as a whole?
One of the things that I was briefed on, and what I will make part of a motion, may as well do it now, is I'd like to direct staff to invite the other entities in local government to a forum sponsored by the City of Las Vegas to discuss current conditions of their government's financial conditions and share strategies for addressing the shortfalls that applies to us all and the limitations in service growth over the coming year or two. And as part of that discussion, consolidation must be at the forefront. the only thing that makes sense. It's, to me, the analysis is a very accurate analysis. It makes very little sense to me that the government's C-tax is affected by growth up, affected by growth down, and we're at odds with one another when we are the area in Southern Nevada which should be together in order to service all of our constituents in a satisfactory manner. So I'm going to make that into a motion,
Your Honor.
too.
Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm sorry to jump in here. Under the agenda item as currently written, I'm not certain that we are agendaed to take action on either one of those, just at the budget in general. It would be my advice to, if you want to take a poll, so to speak, with the council at this open meeting, that's fine, but to direct the manager to put both of those items, both the meeting that you're talking about and the item regarding the legislative direction, on the next council agenda for an official vote.
All right, let's take a poll then on that which was just discussed as to having a forum with the other jurisdictions and as part of that forum to discuss consolidation. All those who think it's a pretty good idea, please say aye.
Aye.
All those who don't think it's a pretty good idea, say no. The ayes have it.
Again, for the-
And we'll also move to rescind the prior motion regarding the home rule. And ask all those in favor of rescinding, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And all those who think it's a pretty good idea to have our destiny under our control. You got your true shaking head. A pretty good idea.
I'm not going to disagree with your idea, Your Honor, but what I would suggest
I want
is
to find out I'm polling them. In an open meeting, we're naked to the world here. We're the only government that does it this way. We are as transparent as you get.
Again, I think
if that's a violation of the open meeting rule, I don't understand it.
I think the open meeting law is going to require an agenda item.
That'll be the next motion. I'm asking for a polling, though.
And I think that the record needs to reflect that this is a lively discussion, but it is not final action on anything until it's on another council agenda for officials.
And I appreciate that. The record will so reflect that. All those who think it's a pretty good idea to be under home rule, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. They think it's a pretty good idea. And we'll address the staff to please place these as agenda items so our city attorney will feel comfortable as he rests. How do you hear you? I have no idea.
Okay.
Mr. Vincent?
Just really quickly, just the impacts of a cut. About two-thirds of our budget you could group and say Group A. Things like public safety, the criminal justice system, infrastructure needs, say is that in Group A. And Group B would be general government, culture and recreation, and maybe some other city functions. And without ascribing priorities to either one or saying that one's somehow exempt from any kind of pressure for innovation or budget reductions, if it were the case that someone told us that we had to endure a 10% budget cut, let's say our revenues went down 10%.
Your Honor, before he goes on, Mark, can you go back?
Yep.
Your Honor, may I?
Certainly.
Keep going.
On that 69, no, right there, 69% in Group A, can you provide us with just a little better definition, if you can, off the top of your head, of the percentage breakdown in Group A, public safety, criminal justice, and then infrastructure?
How about if I try this? About 60% of it's public safety. Judicial would be probably another 7%. Probably another 6% would be infrastructure. General government by itself is probably the next largest category. That might be a little less than 20%, probably around 17% or so. That helps you.
Thank you.
And general government includes all the administrative, it includes the elected body, your staff, the city manager staff, the city attorney, city auditor, all the administrative functions. But it also does include the functions of planning and development and field operations, just by virtue of definition.
Mayor Goodman. Wilson. Thank you. Mark, could you break down the public safety category even farther? I think you said, what, 60% of Group A?
Yeah, I would, you put me on the spot, I'm going to do my best here. The Our contribution to the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department is slightly larger than our funding for our fire and rescue department. They're not quite both 50% of that public safety total, which is...
this does include our contribution to
It
Metro.
does include our contribution to Metro, if that was your
That
question.
explains
Yes.
that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
And you mentioned the criminal justice and the infrastructure. What were those approximate figures?
Criminal justice would probably be about, I think, 7%, and infrastructure from an operating from the general fund operating standpoint, probably about 6%.
So, just looking at Group A, and I don't know, you can explain it to me. We're trying to get to 69% approximately.
Well, now you're going to hold. Now you're going to hold.
I'm not trying to hold you to it. I'm just trying to. Are you saying that the public safety is just a little bit less than the 60%?
I'm saying the other 9%, the other 8 or 9% in Group A, and obviously the numbers I gave you didn't add up, and that's what's causing you great grief. So obviously I can't do math in my head. It's a terrible thing for your finance director to admit. And part of the problem I'm having here is this number up here, the $539 million, that is reflective of a cut. The number I have in my notes is at the budget level, so no matter what I tell you, I'm going to confuse you. But let me commit to you this. I can give you that breakdown after the meeting, specifically what it is. But obviously, judicial and infrastructure is the other 8 or 9 points of the Group A, because 60 or 61 points of Group A is in fact public safety, which includes the Metro contribution, fire and rescue, and code enforcement. Sorry for that confusion. And again, if one were to say, and I'm not exactly saying that, but if one were to say that the Group A perhaps was going to be a little more difficult to have an across-the-board cut, if Group B was to have to absorb a 10% cut, since it's about a third of our budget, that would mean Group B would have to take a 30% cut. So to take a 30% cut in all of the let's say, for example, general government services would be huge. It would be very substantial. So we try not, when we're looking at reductions, we try not to just blithely cut everyone across the board equally, because I don't know that that makes sense, particularly in a large cut. When you're talking about a cut this deep, 10% is a huge cut. We would really want to take a very considered approach to what we would cut and what we wouldn't, and we would clearly involve you all in that decision. But this is just a mathematical exercise. Let me talk a little bit about revenue threats, because we've been talking about it already. I mentioned under consolidated tax, I mentioned the legislative change that happened in 2001 that made C-Tax much more responsive. But we know that every session, at least the last 3 sessions it seems like, there's been a lot of interest in government services tax. Government services tax is a component of consolidated tax. It is the old motor vehicle privilege tax. When you go register your car and you pay that tax, it's rather steep compared to other states. And there's always been an interest in reducing that. And for the city of Las Vegas, that revenue reduction could be as high as just cutting it in half would be a 5% reduction to us across the board. It's a very significant tax. It's a C-tax. So that's a discussion that comes up routinely. We also have AB 621, which was the green building tax that modified or corrected AB 3 from the 2005 session. And let me just give you some. We haven't seen the effects of this yet in the consolidated tax, but there have been some projections done. I know that Jeremy Aguero, Applied Analysis, has done some number crunching for the county. We've done some of our own number crunching, even though we really don't have good data to base it on. Jeremy's estimate, for example, for the state overall, that the state could lose as much as $200 million in sales tax and $300 million in property tax. The portion of that translates down into Clark County would be about $400 million of that would be Clark County. Generally speaking, on the sales tax for Clark County, which is $127 million, this is over a forecasted. Looks like it's about a 12, 13-year actually 15-year period of time. We get about 28 of the sales tax that's generated in Clark County. Our share of that through the C-tax form is about 28%. Put it to you sort of a different way, the projects that are online today that are coming out of the ground that have that were grandfathered in for the green bill abatement, for every $1 billion, Jeremy's estimated that about 25 to 28% of that $1 billion is in materials that would have been subject to sales tax as now exempt. If you work through the formula, that's a 7.75% tax. A portion of that, about a third of that, goes to city-county relief. When it comes down to the county, the city of Las Vegas gets about 28% of that. You do all that mathematical hijinks, and for every $1 billion in a project that's green, we're losing about $2 million in consolidated tax revenues. So it's a significant issue for us. And again, we haven't actually seen the effects of those abatements yet in our revenue stream, and they're already negative. Under property tax, we talked about the AB 49, the growth abatement. In hindsight, I would have far rather the legislature would have capped the assessed value and would have given our local boards the ability to raise taxes and obviously suffer the consequences of raising those taxes, but at least give you the option of making that judgment. Now that the abatement is applied to the tax bill itself, you can raise the tax rates all you want, but it's really not going to generate much in the way of revenue, and that's the way that was designed. Also, with respect to property taxes, we know this last session, in order to deal with a shortfall for state funding, AB 595 is phasing out our share of the 5 cents of the property tax that goes towards our own infrastructure. That's an impact to us. I mentioned AB 621. I don't think we know what those impacts yet. I know that when I've worked with Office of Business Development, Scott Adams and his team, and we've looked at some of the major projects we have in the redevelopment area, one of the things that we have to do is put a big factor in there for how many of those projects do we anticipate will go green, and how much of an abatement are they going to get based upon whether they're silver, gold, or platinum. And who knows, because we don't know what those will be. But we've had to put a factor into our forecast to take that into consideration. But I'm sure that's going to be significant, and it may be as much as tens of millions of dollars when all the dust settles of revenue that we won't get. With respect to franchise revenues, those seem to always be under scrutiny by the legislature. This last session, AB 526, the telecom bill, our estimate is that that bill will cost us about $500,000 a year in franchise revenues. But it's always a sensitive spot. We can't raise that tax any more than it is. It is what it is, and if the legislature decides it should be something less, then that will be a reduction in our revenue. Employee benefits, it's kind of I probably should have described it a little bit differently, but we have, in the state of Nevada, we have a lot of benefit issues that are driven by state law that create some rather significant liabilities that we may not fully recognize on our balance sheet, and some changes are coming out about as a result of that. Probably the thing you all recognize the most about employee benefits is the recent SB 544, where employees are no longer going to be able to opt into the public employee benefit program after about August of next year. What that does for us is that it's going to require that it's going to force those employees to have to stay in our plan, which is fine, but there's a cost to that for us. We also have to, I forget what year and what bill it was, but when the law came about forcing us to have to provide the subsidy to the state for people that opted into it, that also no longer allowed us to have two different insurance rates, one for active employees and one for retirees. We have to have a blended rate. In other words, the active employees are subsidizing the retiree rates. And there's a new accounting pronouncement out, GASB 45, that says if you are subsidizing your retiree rates, you have to recognize that as a liability, and that's in fact what we're doing. To give you an idea, the GASB 45 liability is in the neighborhood of $170 million. This year's contribution, if we had to fund it like ERISA, would have been in the neighborhood of $21 million. We don't have to fund it, but at some point in time, I don't believe we can continue to stay on the pay-as-you-go forever. And so at some point in time, we're going to have to come up with a plan of how we're going to fund that, but it's a significant liability. And it's when you move away from employee retiree health and you move into workers' compensation. I'm having an issue with our outside auditors today about the size of the liability that we've recognized in our financial statements and whether it's large enough or not. I can tell you that when we did an actuary study 2 years ago looking just at the presumptive illnesses, that liability was over $100 million. So there's a lot of things that are happening in the area of employee benefits that we don't have a lot of control over, but they're significantly large liabilities that are going to come home at some time in the future. And we need to start talking about them, and we need to start planning for them, and that's kind of why I was bringing that up. And then, of course, we have other issues. There's a pecking order, and the state's up here, and the county's here, and the city's here, and we understand that order. And when the county felt that it needed to have more revenues for its regional park system, obviously it was able to make a change to the LVCVA tax distribution. And as long as we get the regional parks that service our residents, I think that's fine, but that's something that was taken away from us. So there's always these outlier things that are going on that our legislative team is constantly watching. They're keeping me informed. We're talking. But we try to have as much influence over these outside forces as we can, but that's about all we can do is try to influence, and we really don't have a lot of control. So that's part of why Councilman Reese was asking me the question about forecasts and where would we have the numbers. When you see these sorts of things that are looming out there that still haven't come to fruition, my conservative nature is to shave off a little bit because of the unknown factor of what may happen at future sessions. So, what are we going to do about the 08 shortfall in the 09? Just as a reminder, in 2007, we did have a budget reduction of $20 million when we realized we weren't going to make our target. That was able to be absorbed through vacancy savings. We actually exercised a little more control over the committee that oversees vacant positions. We were able to do that pretty, I wouldn't say easily, and I won't say comfortable, but we were effective at making sure we reached that target. As we look into this year, the current year that we're in, the 3% cut, we're talking about a $16.2 million cut. So it's less than the 20 we had last year. And it will be absorbed through vacancies that we'll control, again, through the directors and the committee. But in addition to the 16.2, we're suggesting that we draw down part of that fund balance. This is what we're talking about before, where we have that excess fund balance that we normally go to one-time capital projects. We feel in order to lessen the blow a little bit, we need to draw it down. And then the balance of that fund balance, we would carry over possibly into fiscal year 09. If we don't see the recovery, as we're going through the budget workshop and the budget hearing process, and we're getting a little closer to having more complete numbers for fiscal year 08, we'll know how much, if any of this, we need to implement or whether it's enough. So don't necessarily need to take specific action on this, but just to sort of prepare ourselves that it is possible that we may need to look at an additional 3% vacancy savings. Now, let me try to explain this. This is a little bit different. If in this year we take a 3% vacancy savings, and we unfund those positions that council created. When we go into fiscal year 09 and we add another 3% on top of that, that's essentially a cumulative 6% reduction in vacancies that we're planning to have. In my mind, that creates a real significant burden on the departments to continue to provide the same level of services. And that's where the concept of Performance Plus hopefully starts to kick in to help us make better decisions about where we want to allocate those resources. And when we can't provide the budgetary resources, what's the impact going to be on the results of that program? Is the program going to suffer adverse results? And what do we need to do about that? So this is kind of a little farther off. We're probably 6 months away from probably less than 6 months, more like 4 months away from having a real discussion about specifics. But I'm trying to prepare you now. Not only are we dealing with the cut for 08, but I think there's going to be a little tightening in 09 as well. And so we'll reduce fund balance a little bit more. Again, we're always going to be looking toward eliminating or revising programs and functions that would perhaps fall out of the Performance Plus. And we may want to look at delaying funding of additional capital projects.
Mayor Goodman?
Yes, Councilman.
Mr. Vincent, you may have already mentioned this, but if you will repeat the 3% vacancy, what does that equate in dollars? What does that come out to?
Close to $10 million.
I'm sorry?
Close to $10 million, about that.
And that's over a time span of how many years?
1 year, 12 months.
And then if you added the other additional 3%, it would be really a total of 6% that year. It would be $20 million.
Total of $20 million, and where we get the other savings is from drawing down the fund balance. If we don't draw down the fund balance, if we don't plan to do that, then those cuts have to be that much deeper. And I'm just, my personal concern, talking with the city manager's office and the directors, the department directors, is that I think that would adversely affect our delivery of services. And my concern is, if I have been too conservative, I don't think we should cut deeper than we have to. I'd rather wait to the point in time where we say, yes, the next step, we need to do the next step of cuts. I'd rather wait till then to do that.
And basically, Mr. Mayor, if I could continue, please.
Certainly.
This is really coming out of Group B.
No, not necessarily.
No,
and then that was my
everything?
fear. I didn't want to imply that it was coming out of Group B. It just, there are certainly going to be certain things that you as a counselor are going to give us some direction on, and I don't mean to
It just
lead
seems
to.
we have more flexibility in Group B, whereas Group A, it seems if we were taking out of that public safety, metro fire, criminal justice, or infrastructure, we have less flexibility.
We probably have less flexibility, but that's not to mean that there aren't things we still could do. Obviously, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department's in the middle of developing its budget. We should be giving them input that, this is what our outlook is, and this is what we expect you to come in. And I'm not going to I would never presume to tell the police department how they should manage their operation, but I am prepared to tell them the limits of our ability to fund it and let them make decisions of what's important and what's not. But again, I sort of misspoke. Ultimately, you all are going to make that decision about what level of funding you feel is adequate for them. I'd hate to think that there isn't anything else that we can improve efficiency-wise in the fire and safety department. I'm sure there are some things. But the preponderance of what we do there is fire suppression and emergency response. So there may be fewer opportunities, but that's not to say there aren't some. So I hate to say that it's all going to be in Group B and not in Group A. I don't think that's a fair statement.
Would it be fair to say that there would be more out of Group B than out of Group A?
I would
don't know yet.
The deeper the cut, the more that's a true statement. How about that for an answer? The deeper the cut, the more that's true. I think that's valid.
It's scary.
Yes, but that's not really the scary thing. To me, we're completely forgetting about the X factor, and the X factor being our friends up there in Carson City. It's really easy for us to look at our budget but it's scary to me, you read in the paper what they're talking about doing, how it's going to affect us in the long run. I mean, to me, it's mind-boggling even to think what could happen. And we need to be prepared, I think.
Well, one of the things I was hoping to accomplish today is there has been a lot of press in the paper about the difficulties the state having, and I'm not denying the state's having difficulty, but the local government's having the same difficulty. We are in the same boat as they are, and we have even less control over it than they do. And I think that's one of the things I wanted to make sure it was clear today is that it's not a doomsday scenario. It is different for us. We have an elected board that meets every 2 weeks, not every 2 years. We have a management structure that's more closely resembles a corporation, a private corporation, than the state. The state's rather large and geographically dispersed. We have a city manager form of government where we're a little more nimble. But that doesn't mean that the cuts don't hurt, that they don't affect the services to our citizens any less than the state. And sometimes my concern is that we get punished. We talked about this at the budget hearing, if I recall correctly. Sometimes we get punished for being good managers and good stewards because of the job we do. And I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood that we are suffering just as much as the state on this revenue shortfall.
And is Ted Olivas here?
Yes.
All right, Mr. Olivas, I believe that you are working on bringing together state leaders, both from the legislature, elected officials in the valley here, and members of the private sector, so that we can have, once again, a discussion, a meaningful discussion concerning the future of revenue in the state. And a part of that discussion will be, of course, what we want to see this state become, how we're going to get there, and how much it's going to cost. Now, that's an interesting dichotomy when we're talking about the budget and cuts today. But on the other hand, I think as elected officials, we as a council have the obligation to plan and to carry through for the future, not only the future immediately, but future generations, and the decisions that will be made by us that will affect that. I don't think anybody would suggest that we're trying to shirk whatever responsibilities that we may have to the state, and to make sure that the state is in fact sound and state projects are sound, but at the same time we can't agree to any kind of a shift of the burden, particularly when we control so little of our own destiny with that 12% of the resources which are given to us in effect. So hopefully that'll be done sooner than later. And that's not a motion, that's just a wish.
Mayor Goodman, you are correct. We are working on that as we speak, and we'll be following up with your office.
All right, very good. Councilman.
Thank you. Mark, may I ask you to go back a slide, please? One more. The proposed fiscal year 08 action steps, these are the things that you're proposing we do now?
Yes.
In the next couple of months?
Very similar to what we did last year, where we went through and actually made, essentially what we're doing is we're going through the budget, we'd go through the budget and we would remove from the department's budgets the vacancy savings that we predict they're going to get. We're going to take the savings now.
Now, that goes to my next question. The 3% reduction absorbed through vacancies. What departments are we talking about? And do we have control over shifting, if you will? If there are certain departments where we want to leave alone and leave the vacancies alone versus other departments where we may want to make an adjustment, do we have that flexibility but still keep it at a 3% so we save that $16.2 million? Does that make sense?
Yes, we do, and you're exactly right. I can give you an example. When we first created the committee back in 2001, you did provide us some guidance, and it's still the guidance we try to use today. The first priority was public safety. If there was a position that was directly involved in providing public safety, those we tried to fill as best we can. And naturally, a lot of those you would think would be positions that have to go through an academy, so there is sort of a step progression. But that's not to say that there aren't positions in the fire department, for example, or detention department that we may stay vacant for a while. There are administrative positions that come up vacant that we might defer those for a while. So yes, there is flexibility. Every budget year we also look at those vacant positions, and any vacancies that have been vacant, any positions that are vacant 6 months or longer, are always candidates for us to look at reprogramming to some other need. In fact, we did that this past year, and we've done it the last 3 or 4 years in a row. We've had some positions that we've reprogrammed.
Mayor Goodman? Yes. Mr. Vincent, how in fact, if at all, overtime comes into play as a savings?
The overtime issue, the major departments that contribute most significantly to overtime are primarily to public safety departments, detention and enforcement, particularly the detention side, and fire and rescue. When you talk about corrections facility and when you talk about stations, posts on positions on a unit in a fire station, those are funded are staffed on a 24/7 basis. Typically, if someone is absent for whatever reason, someone else has to fill that position on an overtime basis. At the budget hearing last May, I think I shared with you some of our calculations and some of our thoughts about the fact that overtime in itself is not a bad thing. Oftentimes, overtime is a cheaper solution than hiring a new body, putting them through the academy, because you still have to deal with issues of absenteeism. They're still going to get sick and have vacation and so on and so forth. The question comes out in those areas. You're going to have to staff those positions for the most part, regardless, either with overtime or a new body. And again, there's some tipping point at which you look at, depending upon are you filling these positions with brand new folks just out of an academy, and can you fill them that fashion, or is there trickle down effect that you, as you don't have all your vacancies aren't at the first level of the function. For example, you'd have them at firefighters, engineers, firefighter paramedics, captains, bat chiefs, so on and so forth. So there isn't, in my opinion, there's not a whole lot. There are certain things we can do to manage the overtime in those areas, but to the extent we're not staffed where we should be, then overtime has to be the answer. Has to be. And I think I mentioned at the budget hearing that if you, based upon average productivity factors, and if you want, it would not be a good thing to do. I wouldn't recommend it, but to give you an order of magnitude, if you wanted to go out and hire enough fire personnel to eliminate all overtime in the fire department, you'd have to hire 400 plus people. That's an astronomical number. And we couldn't run those people through the academy fast enough anyway. But for the most part, generally speaking, overtime is a cost-effective way of meeting absenteeism.
Is there a list that you have set up somewhere within the budget, or that will demonstrate where, in fact, in, I guess, numerical order of the departments that have overtime?
We can provide you with, we do routine overtime reports, and we can provide you with that. It won't be obvious in the budget, the way the budget's put together. It's at a summarized level. You won't see overtime in the budget, but we can provide that to you.
Thank you.
All right, very good. Yes, Mr. Vincent.
Obviously, if I'm wrong and it's even worse than we thought, then obviously we're going to have to continue to look at eliminating or changing programs. We probably would look at identifying some of the capital project funds that are yet not obligated or projects haven't started. These would be funds that came from the general fund to begin with. They would not include SNPLMA or other dedicated funds that we can't reprogram. We obviously wouldn't fund any new capital projects in '09, and we might even have to consider revising our fund balance policy, though that's one of the strong reasons why we just got a bond upgrade. And you know, I just want to mention that's one of those interesting things. I had a phone call from the state treasurer's office, wanted to know how the heck we got a budget, how the heck we got a bond rating upgrade in the middle of all this downturn. And part of the answer is we prepare ourselves well, we plan for these sorts of things, and we take quick action when we need to. And so having a fund balance policy that has a good balance keeps us in good stead, and eventually everything will turn back up, and we want to be issuing bonds for new projects, and we're going to be happy to have that bond rating when we do that. So, but that is something we could look at doing as well. So that concludes my presentation.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation. At this time, are there any comments or questions by the council?
I do, Your Honor.
Councilor Ross.
Thank you. And Ted, would you come back up to the lectern there for me, please? You know, Your Honor, and council members, Mark has definitely demonstrated to us the large extent that the state has control over our revenues. And I just want to bring Ted up. Your Honor, I know you kind of started talking to him about this, and I thought that's where you're going to go with it. Ted, are we going to, I know in every legislative session the city has to play defense quite a bit, and I know last year you guys brought us a great offensive plan in regards to the city's strategies, and Chris, I see you sitting there in the back. When are we going to, are you guys working on that now? Are we going to be a little more prepared? Well, I don't know about more prepared, but you've kind of heard the council today and the mayor's thoughts and our thoughts about what we'd like to see as the public servants who serve this city. I don't know what steam is going to get us or how many friends or enemies it's going to make us in Carson City, but I'd be interested to see what you've come up with so far for our legislative strategies for this next session, even if you haven't even started on them. I mean, but I think that definitely needs to be in the mix.
For the record, Ted Olivas, Director of Government and Community Affairs. You are correct, Councilman. We have to be take an offensive approach to the legislature, and to that end, and Mark's presentation, I worked with him on that because we wanted to make sure that we identified those things, those threats. And I think what we've been doing, and to answer your question directly, absolutely we're working on it. Some of the stuff that we're doing specifically, and I think one of the most important things is doing education for the City of Las Vegas legislators. We're bringing them in and we're talking about the budget. We're talking about the things that we do and why we do them. I think education is really important. And finance is, and our budget is a topic and will continue to be a topic at every one of those meetings, because we want to get the message out to them that, one, the state's having this problem, we're having the same problem. Two, and I think more importantly, is we have so little control of the money that we have for our revenues. That's a big problem. They need to understand that. So those are the kind of things that we're working on from a legislative perspective, and most of it's education specific. The other thing is there is some interim committees, and we're attending all of those committees just to get the face time with the legislators. They're looking at things like C-Tax. They're doing a staff study on the consolidated tax. We do know that there is going to be a bill next session for Northern Nevada. We know that Reno and Sparks are proposing to make a change that will affect Washoe County. That, of course, doesn't affect us directly, but indirectly now we've opened up the C-tax issue, and that creates some concern on my behalf. And so we're trying to do the best that we can to educate the legislators so they know where we stand from a legislative perspective.
And I know you are. I think you've got a great team and a great staff, and you're doing a fabulous job. But I remember last session some of the crazy thoughts and ideas. Some of our legislators thought that the municipalities were flush with money and wanting to impose some interesting tax constraints on governments, both state and local. Fortunately, none of those passed and got through, but that's just not the case. And Ted, I think you hit it on the head. If you're educating those lawmakers, our assembly people and state senators on just where we're at, where we're going, and how we're doing it, it's probably our best defense to be offensive on the get-go.
Everything that Mark listed on those threats, they are real threats, and those are the things that we're focusing on in terms of preparing ourselves for the next session.
Look forward to your report. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Comments or questions? All right, thank you.
I'm ready to make a motion.
Motion, please.
I want to thank Mark for the great report he gave us today. It isn't a gloomy outlook, but for our lobbyists up in Carson City, my motion, part of my motion is going to be that in that 3% cut, they're going to be first.
Brad, when I need you.
I thought that was pretty good, actually.
I think that was anyhow, I make a motion to accept this report with all staff conditions.
All right, thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Let me say this. This is really a very special type of proceeding. The city does it almost uniquely as far as government is concerned, where we have these kinds of discussions in public with the media present, ready to criticize us, hopefully constructively. But there are no secrets. We're very transparent. That's part of our policy. And it's a good policy because we share with each other very frankly truths which are not necessarily so evident. And I think at the end of the day, we're a better city for it. And I want to thank our staff, all the way from Dr. Selby, Steve, Betsy, Orlando, Mark, and Patty. She's not here. She's fired. Tell her that we thanked her anyway, okay? And of course, the thoughtfulness of the council for their questions, their observations. It's very, very important that we continue to do our business this way, and hopefully an awful lot of good will come out of this. Certainly the bottom line is we're a great city, and we're doing everything we have to do to keep ourselves that way. And that's very special to be able to serve under those circumstances. All right, this is the time for citizens' participation. Public comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters within the jurisdiction of the City Council. No subject may be acted upon by the City Council unless that subject is on the agenda and is scheduled for action. If you wish to be heard, please come up to the mic, state your name, and we'll be happy to hear from anybody. Anybody like to come forward for citizens' participation? Seeing none, the meeting is adjourned.
We may want to consider having our council meetings up here. Hey, Mayor?
Yes.
We may want to consider having our council meetings up here.
Yeah, I'd like to. That's a very good idea.